What does this image look like to you? Most people would say it's a simple bullseye shape with a few extra semicircles, or maybe it's a rudimentary flower. If you take out the semicircles, it's just a run-of-the-mill bullseye or a ripple in the water. But with the semicircles, it's an in-universe map from Hajime Isayama's Attack on Titan. The three concentric circles represent massive stone walls surrounding farmland, and the semicircles are lesser walls protecting individual cities. The characters of Attack on Titan cower inside these walls as the last remnants of the human race, which was decimated by giant man-eating humanoids called Titans. We know from the start that the Titans are a very real threat, and the walls are humanity's only protection. But aside from a handful of giant monsters, the characters and the audience have no idea what might really be beyond the walls. The characters aren't allowed to leave, and neither is the audience, because of how fiction works. The concentric design of the walls function to protect the innermost point where the king and the rest of the monarchy live. When the Titans finally break through the outer wall, the survivors are pushed inwards, converging behind the smaller wall. This is the only path they can take, from the outside in. Even moving in a straight line towards the center, the refugees will be coming from 4 compass points, so as a whole they'll form a sort of shrinking bracelet that threatens to eventually surround the center point. This inward shrinkage is implied by the bullseye shape, but the moment we start thinking of the geography as a ripple instead of a bullseye, our eyes are drawn from the center out. Still, moving out from the center, there's only really one logical path. Everyone moving in a straight line, all of them together forming a growing circle. But what would change about the general flow of the architecture if we added a spiral shape on top? Whether it's flowing in or out, the spiral shape implies a more gradual movement that more closely resembles the movement of the characters in Attack on Titan. Not their physical emigration after the breach of the outer wall, but the movement of their character arcs and the continual but not always visible revelation of Hajime Isayama's epic world building. Realistically, if the only goal of protagonist Eren Yeager was to escape the wall around his village, he could have just walked in a straight line through the hole kicked in by the Colossus Titan. A straight line is, after all, the shortest distance between 2 points. But for most of the show, Eren wasn't ready to escape the walls and see what lay beyond. But more importantly, the audience wasn't ready either. When the path of the audience and characters finally spirals outside the outer wall, the revelation of the world beyond comes as a massive surprise, but it doesn't come out of nowhere. As the audience, we've walked this spiraling path through the lore and history of this world to the ideal point where we will be surprised by the revelation, but not think it was unearned or random. Sure, we could have taken a shortcut and moved in a straight line from inner to middle to outer circles, regardless of the spiral. But if the world beyond the walls was revealed in episode 1, it wouldn't have been a surprise, and if it was revealed in season 2, we wouldn't have even known enough about the world to comprehend what we're seeing. And even though Grisha promised to show Eren what was in the basement, the guiding hand of fate in this case being Isayama, held Eren back until he and the audience were ready. The spiral over the map lets us take a linear, if roundabout, path through the narrative, but consider adding this graphic on top of it. The circular walls of the maze line up with the spiral, but as we can see, it would be impossible to take the same linear route without running into a few walls and dead ends. A more complicated route is needed to spiral out through the maze from the center of the walls into the outer ring. Actually, technically, this maze doesn't even have an exit, so there's no way to get out, even after you explore every nook and cranny of the labyrinth. But as anyone who hated the end of Attack on Titan will tell you, it's about the journey, not the destination. Like the bullseye, this maze graphic is an in-universe map from a story with complicated lore, Bionicle. Attack on Titan and Bionicle don't have much in common on the surface. One is a manga and anime very much not for children. The other is a line of buildable action figures under the LEGO brand whose story was told across trade paperbacks, comic books, online stories, and low-budget but lovable movies. Chikua! If you've seen the video that got this channel on the radar, then you'll probably know how much I think of Bionicle lore. And I don't want to brag, but I was once called the least pretentious Bionicle fan. I think that was probably meant in a negative kind of way, but whatever. I'll take it. Needless to say, from here on out, I'll be talking about full spoilers from all of Bionicle and all of Attack on Titan. There's also a little bit of dark later on because I love dark. there's so much to talk about. But what the two series have in common is the structure of their world building, the spiraling concentric circles that reveal the mythology to the audience in a sometimes maze-like path of smaller steps. Both series begin with a small, contained fictional world with a simple setup of innocent characters defending against the species that prey on them. Both series would be almost unrecognizable by the end of their story. Just like Attack on Titan begins with humanity hiding in a relatively small area, Bionicle begins on a small, isolated island whose biomechanical villagers could, for all we know, be the last survivors of some great cataclysm. The Bionicle version of the Titans were the Rahi, vicious wild animals who were controlled to attack the Matoran villagers by the evil Makuta. But for all the Matoran or the early fans knew, Makuta could have been a myth, a personification of violence made up by the village elders. Attack on Titan establishes early on that the monarchical government behind the walls is actively purging any information about the world before, and no one seems to have any records of the building of the walls or of the Titan apocalypse, even though it happened only a century earlier. Attack on Titan lets you know from the start that the surviving humans are walled off less for their protection and more to make them docile. Eren Yeager's opening claim that, quote, "home was a pen and humanity cattle," could refer to the government's hold through disinformation just as much as it refers to the Titans. The Island of Mata Nui is very different from the oppressive post-industrial revolution dark ages of Attack on Titan, but secrets are also being kept from the Matoran. Secrets so well kept that even the audience didn't suspect anything. Both Attack on Titan and Bionicle begin with world building so simple that it forces the audience to ask all kinds of existential questions, like where did the Titans come from? Why is the king trying to erase all knowledge of the pre-wall world? Who set the Toa adrift in their canisters, and how do the Turaga know so much about them? Is it really possible to awaken the Great Spirit Mata Nui from his coma, or is that whole thing just a metaphor? One mystery is shared between the series, a question that Eren and Armin bring up over and over while the Matoran don't seem to wonder. The question of what exists beyond this small, isolated world. Unlike, say, A Song of Ice and Fire, which you can read in its entirety, or in its perpetually unfinished state, without wondering what the rest of the planet looks like, because that wasn't a huge consideration for medieval Europeans, the Attack on Titan walls and their associated propaganda form a sort of Chekhov's gun. And while the story of Bionicle could have been contained to the island's setting, like the one-dimensional 2015 reboot was, the arrival of the Toa from the outside world implies a grander, worldwide mystery, just like the appearance of the Colossus Titan. Now, before I go on making comparisons, I want to point out that I'm not just referencing the concept of foreshadowing in general. The main crux of what makes Attack on Titan and Bionicle stand out is that it seems like every minute detail of their lore and storylines were planned out ahead of time, and if they weren't, then the writers did a hell of a job making it seem like they were. There's symbolic foreshadowing, like Mikasa's association with praying mantises, which decapitate their mates, or literally showing lore in a way that the audience won't understand, like when Eren's head starts steaming and you realize on your second watch that it's not just a goofy anime reaction, it's literal Titan steam from his healing factor. I'm also not talking about future Eren appearing throughout Season 1 of the anime because, well, that actually didn't happen, despite what some fans will tell you. But if it did happen, that would be foreshadowing along the lines of Nibbler's shadow appearing in the first episode of Futurama, a seed subtly planted early on, like a reminder to do something with that storyline in the future. Do I think Matt Groening knew exactly why Nibbler pushed Fry into the cryopod when he wrote Space Pilot 3000? Not necessarily. Do I think Isayama knew exactly what he was foreshadowing when Eren heard Mikasa say, "See you later, Eren," and he told her hair had gotten longer? Maybe not word for word, but I have total faith that Isayama knew what was in Grisha's basement, and that the creators of Bionicle knew why Metru Nui had 2 moons. For Attack on Titan, the innermost point in our chart represents 10-year-old Eren Yeager and the outer wall city of Shiganshina, the simplest narrative point in the history of this fictional world. It's a point where we can jump in and understand this fictional world because, like the reader, the characters we follow also think they know pretty much everything. The origins of the Titan is a mystery for both reader and character, but so much attention is misdirected on them that the narrative tricks you into not questioning what would later seem like obvious sources of intrigue. We know the Titans are mindless flesh eaters, we know they killed everyone outside the walls, we know the survivors have been lulled into a false sense of security. Beyond that, what even is there to wonder about besides the exact origins of the Titans? For Bionicle, like we said, the innermost point is the Island of Mata Nui. Unless you're the kind of person who's wondering where the entire Matoran species came from, because you can't just accept biomechanical humanoids existing on their own, there isn't much mystery going on here, aside from the origins of the Toa and whether they can really wake up the Great Spirit Mata Nui. Like the Titans, the Toa came from outside the single solipsistic piece of civilization in the known world.
Times are dark, and evil rules. Strange canisters drift ashore on the island of Mata Nui.
The Matoran don't know if there are other intelligent species in the world, or even any other islands besides Mata Nui. With the arrival of the Toa, they would have to start wondering, but just like the Crown and Church in Attack on Titan, the Turaga are withholding the Matoran's own origins from them. Maybe it's because Bionicle was first and foremost a toy line, and they had to find story reasons to create at least 6 new heroes and 6 new villains every season.
6 legendary heroes have arrived. These mighty Toa must discover the masks of power, defeat evil, and free the island. 6 heroes, 1 destiny.
But its world-building revelations came in bigger leaps and bounds than Attack on Titan, whose ascent into knowledge took a more roundabout, spiraling direction. You see where I'm going with this? Both series spent time in their innermost circles, but of course Attack on Titan was already minutely spiraling out, and Bionicle was already finding its way through the maze since the beginning. Attack on Titan revealed early on that Eren Yeager could transform into a sapient titan, an ability even he didn't know he had. At the time, this felt like a world-shattering revelation that tore apart everything the reader knew about the lore. But with hindsight being 2020, this reveal feels more like the end of a prologue, the moment when Attack on Titan switched from a zombie tower defense to the fleshy mecha it is ultimately known as. Bionicle stayed on Mata Nui for a while, following the original 6 Toa through their encounter with Makuta, who did seem to be some kind of incomprehensible cosmic deity, their battle against the Borok swarms, and their mutation into the more powerful Toa Nuva. The first couple years of Bionicle were a pretty straightforward storyline following our superpowered heroes and a new, more powerful villain every season. But again, with hindsight, we can see that the existence of the Borok, the Mask of Time, and Makuta's underground lair were early hints of the wider universe, small forays away from the center of the maze. While the Titans and the Toa came from outside our small fictional worlds, the question of the worlds beyond didn't become a central mystery until the revelation that Reiner, Bertold, and Annie were spies from an outside civilization, and that the Turaga were actually former Toa from an entirely different island. Through the spies' dialogue and Ymir's backstory episode, where an outside city looks deceptively like the walls we know, the world building of Attack on Titan crosses that second circle on our chart into a story where the Titans may still be the central premise, but they're no longer the most pressing mystery or the greatest threat. Bionicle reaches the second circle when the Turaga's backstory is revealed, and like I said, Bionicle's expansion into the wider world is more staggered. The storyline wanders through the maze, picking up tidbits of lore before suddenly jumping into a wider world of mythology and a literal bigger world hidden beneath the previous setting. The years focusing on the Turaga as the Toa Metru isn't a step backwards, even though they were told in flashbacks.
Can't even light up a fat fucking spliff without one of those bloody robotic fucks catching a whiff and beating the living daylights out of me.
The revelation of Metru Nui, another island that's implied to somehow be beneath Mata Nui, despite clearly not being underground, is an expansion from the nucleus of the story. If we pretend for a second that the story of Bionicle really happened, and we've been tasked with adapting that history into a reasonably paced storyline, it would only make sense thematically to start with the Toa Nuva and flash back to the Toa Metru. Like Attack on Titan, Bionicle expands ever outwards in its revelations of the future and the past, and the trajectory of its storytelling is based around the knowledge of the audience and the POV characters, not the actual in-universe timeline. By the way, when the Toa first washed up on Mata Nui, they were in big metal canisters that looked just like the plastic canisters the toys originally came in. This is actually part of the proof that Bionicle was planned out from the start. Once I tell you what inspired the original creator, it'll all click into place. The gradual, spiraling way Isayama chips away at the block containing both his lore and his literal world will have audiences suddenly realizing that they never suddenly realized a thing. There are plenty of holy shit moments in Attack on Titan, but lore drops like every Titan being a former human, or Ymir being a century old and from outside the walls, or the spies' civilization being a lot more modern than what we know, or even the ultimate discovery that Eren has transitioned from protagonist to antagonist. These ideas are all so subtly seeded throughout the series that the audience won't even realize when their opinions have totally shifted. That being said, the moment that the rest of the world is revealed in Grisha's basement comes like a slap in the face. We knew there were people with better technology outside the walls. We knew the crown was hiding some massive truth about the world. We even knew that all pure titans had once been human beings. But the revelation that the human race is alive and well and have progressed to the stage of the early 20th century isn't an idea that Isayama subtly revealed along the way. And neither should it have been, since this was the final culmination of the search for Grisha's basement, which, again, had been built up since the very beginning, but was kept from Eren and the audience by the metatextual deity of Isayama, to the extent that Eren literally had memories that would have given it away erased from his head. With this Bionicle-like sudden revelation of an entire world beyond what we thought was an isolated area, the exploration of Attack on Titan's mythology finally takes us outside the third wall. In the original Bionicle story Bible, written in 2000, it was planned that, quote, "The audience will not at first realize the true quest of the Toa that they control. They, like the Toa, will rely on the information gathered from the Matoran. And while the Matoran don't mislead the audience, the information they give is entirely based on their legendary view of the island they inhabit, and not on the reality behind it." In addition to having their history hidden from them, the Matoran are literally amnesiac, just like the Toa, and just like Eren, which allows them to discover the world of Matoran Nui along with the audience, and with the end of the prequel era of Bionicle comes a further expansion into the world, as we discover that there were countless other islands on a parallel with Matoran Nui, which, again, was somehow under Mata Nui. This and other hints towards the future, like, say, Matoran Nui having 2 moons, were similar to Eren Yeager letting off steam or the Colossus Titan appearing with no footprints behind him. It's not foreshadowing, it's not a clever revelation, it's just the writers showing the truth of the universe and knowing the audience won't understand at this point in the story. The path of lore excavation took its second major step in the last couple seasons of the Toa's story. The geography of the Matoran Universe had become increasingly convoluted and confusing, especially for the kids who read the comics and the books, but didn't have any fellow fans to discuss them with. The island of Nui was in the same ocean as Matoran Nui, until it shot up into the sky and ended up in the same ocean as Mata Nui, which is above the other ocean. And then part of Nui broke off and floated back down to the ocean below, and then part of that part broke off and went down to the ocean floor. I'm still not totally clear on how that works. But the ultimate answer to this confusing geography, the ultimate revelation that explained not only Nui, but also almost every mystery in the series to date, came when the now extensive cast of heroes fulfilled their ultimate goal and woke the great spirit Mata Nui from his coma. The best-kept secret in the franchise was finally revealed, and thousands of young fans kicked themselves for not realizing earlier. The entire Matoran Universe was inside the body of an unspeakably tall robot, taller than the circumference of Earth's moon, standing on an even more gigantic ocean planet. The Great Spirit Mata Nui was the Matoran Universe, and he had been asleep on the ocean floor. Only his face was exposed, and that became the island of Mata Nui. Matoran Nui, floating in an artificial ocean inside a massive cavern in his head, was Mata Nui's brain. Just like Attack on Titan, Bionicle had its fans so feverishly putting together the pieces of its lore that they forgot to notice the picture being formed by the puzzle. How do I know that the Great Spirit robot was planned out from the start and wasn't just a last-minute rug pull of an epic revelation? Well, for one thing, his face appears in Mata Nui Online game, which came out way back in 2001. Then there's his name, Mata Nui, Maori for Big Face. There's the fact that everything in Matoran Nui and its accompanying islands is made of an element called protodermis, Latin for first skin, and that miners on the island of Mata Nui found an impenetrable layer of it below all the natural rocks and dirt. Then there's the story Bible, which lays it all out from the start. Lying flat on an ocean reef lies the colossus that is the dormant robot Mata Nui. Hidden from view, and from all in the story, this mighty android's face has been overgrown over the centuries until it has taken on the appearance of a small volcanic island. Matoran Nui's twin moons were Mata Nui's eyes, by the way. There were big holes in the cavern above, and you could see the actual sky through them. And the double eclipse in the second movie is Mata Nui closing his eyes as he falls into his coma. Eren Yeager's ultimate plan for near omnicide sees him releasing the Wall Titans and starting the Rumbling. An important step on the slow spiral of realizations had been revealing that the walls were in fact full of hundreds of thousands of abnormals similar to the Colossus Titan. Unfortunately for the entire planet, the Wall Titans were also a Chekhov's gun, and when Eren assumes the power of the founding Titan, he shatters the walls into nothingness and leads the Wall Titans in destroying the entire world. Similarly, for the Great Spirit Robot to stand up straight, the Island of Mata Nui has to be destroyed, and that's why the Borok were created. Back when the audience and the Toa were ignorant of the expanded universe, the Borok were an unstoppable force of evil hell-bent on destroying their island home. But now that everything in the entire universe has been recontextualized, the Borok are an ally who only exists to mindlessly help the Toa accomplish their ultimate goal. Eren destroys the walls, and the Toa destroy Mata Nui. In a literal sense, they've reached the point of no return, and all they can do now is keep moving forward and hope their plans pan out. In a metatextual sense, both stories have taken their ultimate step away from the insulated, entry-level, almost laughably simple worlds where they began. The Rumbling is the breach of the outermost wall, but the awakening of Mata Nui is only reaching the second. By the time the Rumbling reaches Marley, the audience and characters can no longer imagine feeling tense and terrified by a battle with a single pure Titan. And by the time the Great Spirit Robot stands up and we discover that the soul of Mata Nui has been replaced by the evil Makuta, who is now omnipresent and all-powerful within the Matoran Universe, the idea of the Toa using all their strength to stop a single wild animal to protect a single Matoran feels as microscopically relevant as the Toa are to the now evil Great Spirit Robot. Now, you'll notice that I said the revelation of the Great Spirit Robot was only penetrating the second of 3 circles, but weirdly enough, the story jumps almost immediately to breaking through the third. After Makuta takes command of the Great Spirit Robot, he banishes Mata Nui's soul to another planet, where the natives look very similar to the Toa in Matoran. Moving the narrative to another planet gives us the final major piece of the puzzle, the truth behind the Great Beings. Treated like gods for the entire series, the Great Beings are revealed to have been ancient scientists on the world of Spherus Magna, who created the Great Spirit Robot and everyone inside it. In fact, Mata Nui wasn't just a vessel for the Matoran. The Matoran were the beating heart of Mata Nui, referred to in the story Bible as his DNA. The Bionicle Wiki refers to the Matoran as nanotechnology in comparison to the Great Spirit Robot. Them just existing, living their lives inside Mata Nui's head and heart, is what allowed him to live and fulfill his mission of exploring the cosmos. The Matoran were based on the Agori and Glatorian, the native species of Spherus Magna, the planet where Mata Nui ends up. It's in this final part of the story, which was meant to be a soft reboot but ended up tying everything together when LEGO decided to end the line early, when we first see the maze graphic I showed you earlier. In the story, Mata Nui uses a Toa-like body to explore a labyrinth on Spherus Magna, which leads him to discovering the story of the Great Beings and his own creation. According to the story Bible, quote, "The Matoran don't know the reality behind the legends, and the audience themselves only begin to discover it as they progress through the adventure. This should apply to the packaging art, instructions, and also advertising so as not to give the game away." The maze of Bionicle world building has been a long series of disillusioning the Matoran and the audience with what they believed, and the final step is the Great Beings, not gods, but humanoids, who created everyone we know in their image. On his journey through the maze, Mata Nui discovers that the watery world where he had slept for all those thousands of years was actually a fractured part of Spherus Magna, which had split into 3 parts, including Spherus Magna and a second, smaller body. Mata Nui's ultimate destiny, as predetermined by the Great Beings, is to reunite the 3 planets into one, and at the end of the main narrative arc, he manages to accomplish this and kill Makuta in the process. Mata Nui then ascends to a higher state of being, and everyone formerly of the Matoran Universe goes on to live on the newly reformed Spherus Magna alongside the Agori and Glatorian. The Great Spirit Robot collapses and ceases to function for good, releasing the Matoran from their roles as the DNA of a higher being. And a parallel could be drawn to Eren Yeager successfully destroying 80% of humanity, though of course Mata Nui destroying the Matoran Universe was ultimately a positive for everyone. except Makuta. Of course, all those little mysteries in Bionicle and Attack on Titan were cleared up at one point or another through spiraling or maze traveling. Where did that gang of pure Titans come from if Wall Rose was never breached? Well, Zeke used the power of the Beast Titan to turn everyone in Connie's village into pure Titans. Why was Nakama disgusted by the taste of water on Mata Nui? Because the water in Metru Nui is actually liquid protodermis. Why did Eren have such a strong reaction to touching the Smiling Titan? Well, because it has royal blood, which activated the Founding Titan in Eren. Why was Takua specifically the Matoran destined to become the Toe of Light? Well, because he was an Av-Matoran disguised and brainwashed to be a Ta-Matoran. These smaller mysteries and answers make up the complex mosaic that is the mythology and overall storyline of Bionicle, Attack on Titan, and every other series with this level of narrative complexity. Going back to my point about starting in the section of the story that's easiest to jump into, let me bring up another series that I can never stop talking about on this channel, Dark. By the last episode of Dark, the viewer is totally checked out on the paradoxical knot of time travel and incest that forms the backbone of Vinden. Everyone is everyone else's ancestor and or descendant, and everyone has killed and or saved everyone else. Think about the entire timeline of Dark. Pretending you're adapting true events to the screen, where could you possibly start that wouldn't require an unwieldy amount of confusing exposition? Nowhere besides the disappearance of Mikkel in 2019. The fact that the show began in 2017 feeds into this idea that the writers were more like narrative excavators, finding the true nucleus of the world building regardless of if it fit exactly with their reality. Of course, the time travelers are all there in the background of the first episode, but they won't be fully revealed until the viewer has been empowered to comprehend their presence. The in-universe timeline would let you show Adam in the first episode and establish that he's a future Jonas who spent decades building a time machine in the Victorian era so he could go to the apocalypse and kill his aunt who's pregnant with his child and erase reality itself. But that would be like cutting to the Marleyan war room during the fall of Shiganshina, or having Takua stumble into Karta Nui and get sucked by Makuta Mutran's Shadow Leech outside the Codex. Any of these choices would be equivalent to cutting across from the center of the bullseye straight through the outermost circle. It's technically possible, in-universe, but the audience wouldn't be prepared, and neither would the characters. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, why is Rico sitting there telling me not to tell a story out of order? And yeah, a lot of what I'm saying does sound pretty obvious, but don't forget, the story of Bionicle is told out of order. The second major arc was entirely a flashback, but clearly the second level of the maze because Metru Nui was the easiest time and place to comprehend when Mata Nui was all we knew. On that same note, the first question in the series is where did the Toa come from? But to answer that question requires knowledge of the Great Cataclysm, Artaka, the Order of Mata Nui, Hydraxon, Karta Nui, etc. I'm not saying that this type of lateral storytelling is the only option for stories with complex backstories and world building. I'm just pointing out the similar structure between the spiraling revelations of Attack on Titan and the maze-like hints and clues of Bionicle. I'm also just pointing out that if lateral storytelling and small to gigantic world-building mysteries are your kind of thing, you'll probably enjoy my novel When in Rome, the first book in the Broken Clock saga, which I promise I have planned out at least as much as they planned out Bionicle. And if you like my writing, you can join my Patreon, where for only $1 a month, you can get a novel's worth of storytelling every year in weekly installments. Like I said a while back, I don't really know how much of Attack on Titan Isayama had planned out from the start, but he said it was pretty much everything. And I don't know why he would lie, since making it up as he went and still managing to have every detail fit together that well is a seriously impressive feat. I do know that for Bionicle, the Great Spirit Robot twist was planned out from the beginning, as I've shown you in the story Bible, but what makes this such an incredible feat of world building is the path of the development. The creators of Bionicle didn't just decide it would be cool if their pre-existing world of little robot guys was actually inside a really big robot guy. They conceived of Mata Nui as their protagonist and then extrapolated off the idea of his microscopic parts being sapient entities. Along with the Matoran and Turaga as the DNA, the story Bible refers to the Rahi as Mata Nui's white blood cells, the Manas as his immune system, and the Makuta as the keeper of his consciousness. It's clear that when the Bible was first put together, no one had considered the expanse of Mata Nui's body, not even his brain being a massive city below the island, but the original concept is right there. Mata Nui is an impossibly big robot, and the sentient organisms inside him are his life force. The story Bible I've been referring to was put together in 2000 by Alistair Swinnerton, a British author who was heavily involved with Bionicle, but the Mata Nui concept is traditionally credited to Christian Faber, a titan of Bionicle, along with the legendary Greg Farshty. And this credit isn't debated because the story of Mata Nui parallels its creator, the same way the story of Bionicle parallels the maze. In 1986, at only 20 years old, Christian Faber was diagnosed with a brain tumor that ended up being benign but affected his visual cortex. Quote, "Every night I had to eat one of these pills," he told Stonewars.com, a LEGO fan site, in 2023. "And the next morning, I always felt very sick. But when Bionicle came and we needed a story engine behind it, I was thinking about my own situation, putting capsules of medicine into my body to try to find the right spot and cure the illness. This led to the initial idea to have this robot underneath the big island, and then the medicine arrives on the beach. But the medicine, the Toa, were simply not knowing what they would have to do, and first had to find out that they were actually heroes in a big story. Mata Nui was a sick man who needed medicine, and, like Christian Faber, his medicine came in capsules. And like Faber, Mata Nui's sickness came from an integral part of his body. Makuta, the being tasked with upholding his consciousness and keeping the peace among the Matoran, had turned malignant and threatened his life. Luckily, Faber's tumor never expelled his soul from his body and banished him to another planet, and he's still present for the Bionicle community years after the series ended. In 2023, he responded to a tweet about his tumor, saying, quote, "I hope that my story can work as an inspiration for all to face challenges with creativity and hope and pass on the energy." Similar vibes to the very last line of dialogue in the Bionicle comic. "Come, my friends, new and old, it is time to begin." Take this video as a commentary on the power of the human spirit, or take it as a statement of fact that Bionicle and Attack on Titan were incredibly well thought out and similar in the structure of their world building and mystery box revelations. Or take it as some very obvious but very important writing advice about the role mysteries play in world building. Remember to not just throw random stuff at your audience for the sake of a mystery, like, say, a polar bear on a tropical island that the writers did not actually think of a reason for it to be there. Allow your fictional world to exist on its own, and allow the characters to exist within it, and the mystery boxes will write themselves. For instance, no one even thought the Borok were a mystery. They were just a bad guy for the good guys to fight, but their presence was integral to the existence of the Great Spirit Robot. Whatever you take away from this video, I hope you've developed a new appreciation for these two series, and for the insane amount of planning that goes into the world building of some of our favorite fictional universes. Next time you're halfway through a TV show or a book series and a big reveal catches you off guard, take a minute to revel in the shock, so your future self can look back and laugh at how simple an element of the story that was. And once you're done with the whole thing, look back and ask yourself, did the writer take any shortcuts, or did they stick to the path? And was that path a spiral or a maze? I'm not ending this one with move along, alright? I learned my lesson last time. Of course, the video that's like 80% of my total views is the one that can't be monetized because it has a licensed song in it.